of feudal lords during the Edo period. I want to discuss now two more of these 6 settlements. And I want to move on to those today. The first one has to do with non-Japanese visitors to Japan. So if you'll recall, as I mentioned before, Japan was very far from Western Europe. Western Europeans were trying to find a way to get to the so-called Far East or to the land of the Orient, as they used to call it in Oriente. They wanted to be able to get access to things like silk and pepper, so spices and goods that were no longer accessible through the Silk Road because, as those of you who are history majors or other who read history know, the Ottoman Empire had transformed the crossroads at Constantinople into a blockade, essentially, and Europeans didn't want to pay the price, so they went around, right? So this is a big part of the history of global interactions, as you probably know, but it also spurs Europeans to go, and eventually they make their way to Japan. The first Europeans to arrive in Japan ever, as far as we know, they arrived, and they actually arrived by ship. So this was a year-long voyage. One out of 2 ships made it all the way to Goa. The other half did not. And so even fewer would even go as far as trying to get to Macau or to Nagasaki, or to Japan, I should say. So the first ship is actually a merchant ship trying to access all these trade routes and these goods, and they shipwreck at Tanegashima, and I will show you what that is, I guess, on my next slide. I'm going to show you here an account by a Buddhist priest who is telling what he heard, a story he heard from others about the arrival of these foreigners. Do we have anybody who's wants to speak up and would feel like reading out the text if it's pretty short? Volunteers? Yeah, Ethan, yeah. So please go ahead and read for us, Ethan. Thank you.
The men produced a tube 2 or 3 feet long, straight on the outside with a passage inside, and made of a heavy substance.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Another volunteer? Yeah, and tell us your name.
Ben.
Ben, yes. Where is it? There it is.
And they filled it with powder and small lead pellets. Then there was an explosion like lightning and an echo like thunder.
Thank you, Ben. That was very well read. All right, so what is he describing here? Fireworks? Yeah? Cannons. I think it's a tube, maybe not quite as long as a cannon or as big as a cannon, but maybe we're on the ballpark here, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Musket.
A musket, yeah. And tell me your name again. Eli. All right. So this is a firearm, right? This is just a musket or an arquebus at the time. That's being described in the so-called gun chronicles of this Zen monk. So what he is describing here, make sure I have the right, is, hold on a second, is the arrival of something that should not have been so new, right? Because the Chinese have guns, right? They have cannon and muskets, but this is an especially new kind of weapon that is very easy and portable. Europeans have been fighting for much more aggressively, right, amongst themselves. So they have weapons that are a bit more, I would say, impressive. So that is what is being seen here. All right, so these Portuguese merchants arrive on this ship, and they have shipwrecked. Now, they probably didn't actually shipwreck. They probably sort of broke their mast a bit and tried to find a way to be able to pretend to have shipwrecked in order to be welcomed without being attacked by the Japanese. So, having said that, there we go. It's coming up, I think, again. They bring with them things to impress the Japanese, like these muskets, to hopefully be able to open a trade relationship. But also they bring a lot of spices that they've gotten along the way and hope to be able to trade with the Japanese. This is a major moment in the history of Japan, in the history of in fact, the entire world. landing here at Tanegashima, which is not even part of Japan's major islands at this point, but it very quickly becomes important for Japan. So this shipwreck is in 1543. As I mentioned, as you so well pointed out, Eli, this is about the arrival of firearms, but also about the arrival of the West in Japan. Very quickly, the different warlords in Japan hear of this pretty crazy event, and they realize that it has lots of potential to help them make more money. That's the bottom line. So the Portuguese merchants who arrive are then allowed to go and to establish a port or a base to work their trade from at Hirado, which is here. So, kind of far on the very edge of things, and they're allowed to trade from there. It becomes more important as the daimyo realize what this could also mean for Japan. The most important part I want to emphasize today is that there was a situation in which the Ming Dynasty and we'll call it the disorganized governments in Japan stopped trading with each other. To trade with Ming China, you had to have a red seal, and the red seal, the officials in China, they had one half of the seal, and those who were approved from outside of China had the other half of the seal. So the Japanese had access to this system, but because there were so many pirates and such on Japan's side, an inability to assure safe trade, the Chinese revoked the privilege of Japan to trade with them directly. But people in China and people in Japan still wanted to trade, and so they were finding ways to go around this, basically. And here arrived the Portuguese with their big galleons. They can hold all this cargo. They have cannon ports, right? They can perhaps safely assure the cargo between Japan and China. And making things even more complicated and more interesting as well is that the Ming Dynasty also requires, in this time period, all taxes to be paid in silver. But the silver in China is in short supply, whereas in Japan, it is not in short supply. Japan is a silver-producing, silver-mining country, along with places in Latin America that are going to be very important in the history of the trade of species. So the need for Japanese silver in China, very high. Desire for Chinese silk in Japan, extremely high. But there's this pesky issue, right, of being able to trade. And the Portuguese arrive in this situation able to transport the goods. So they act as middlemen, carrying Japanese silver to China and Chinese silk to Japan, and making a huge profit off of this. And this is how they begin to have this small, physical but big economic role in Japan. This is a screen or a set of screens depicting the arrival of one such Portuguese merchant vessel. Yeah, and I've forgotten your name. Tell me your name.
Nolan.
Nolan, yeah.
What differentiated
Well, Portuguese ships were bigger. They were much heavier. They had more cannon. These are just better gunboats. That's the bottom line. The Europeans were just making a lot better ships for warfare. This has actually to do with the Chinese sort of turning away from travel and trying to trade with the rest of the world. As you may have heard of before, there were vessels in the early Ming Dynasty that were going, they were going across the world. They were going all the way to Africa, and they were trying to demand tribute under a very famous eunuch named Zheng He. So they had built impressive ships to go far away, but they stopped doing that. They focused on internal tensions. They tried to reduce maritime trade that could be perhaps destabilizing for the country inside. So they didn't have that. They didn't have that sort of maritime naval focus. So, good question. Portuguese ships, and after that, also very soon after that as well, Spanish ships were better equipped for this kind of carrying and protecting of cargo. So this is an image here you can see of these screens. We have some of the things we talked before about the importance of the clouds and the gold leaf. So this is a very impressive, beautiful set of screens. But I want to zoom in a bit and talk about what's happening in the screens as well. So I'm going to zoom into the top one here, and I want to see what you can see. All right, so this was actually painted in the early 1600s, so it's been going on for a while, this trade. But what kinds of things stand out to you in this part of this screen? The screen would have been about, about 6.5 feet tall, right? Meant to dazzle, but also tell a story. So what kinds of things stand out to you in this part of the scroll? Nick, yeah?
There's a person on an elephant.
There's an elephant, yeah, right? So that's an impressive thing. It's a new thing, right? Well spotted. Thank you for that, Nick. What else do you see?
I'm back.
Back.
So some of the people have umbrellas.
Okay, there are umbrellas. And the umbrellas, why are those for you of interest?
It seems like all the people that have them are wearing like darker colors.
Okay, so the umbrella is something that is being used not for the rain but for the sun, right? To protect people of a certain class, most likely. The color scheme might be important. We can probably see more with that as well. This person here actually has an umbrella too, but it's a bit hard to see. So I like that. All right, tell me your name again.
Quinn.
Quinn, yeah?
European pants.
European pants. By which you mean like there's two legs, there's two, what do you call it, legs? I don't know. There are two legs, right, as opposed to other kinds of clothing, also stand out. So things that are a bit different, right? We have the elephant and we have the different clothing. And if we look at this is a zoom in from the other picture a bit. I want to see if we see more things that might be of interest as well that we can add to that. You mentioned the dark clothing on this one. This person here, Beck, is he wearing dark clothing too? Kinda? Kinda? What might you say about this person or people like that? Are they Portuguese merchants? Nolan. So they're definitely like of some kind of a serving class, definitely, yeah. Henry?
Yep, Henry. They appear to be Western Europeans, like the gentleman under the umbrella towards the middle, what appears to be a foreigner.
So they're definitely foreigners.
They appear to be foreigners.
Okay, so this is definitely a foreigner, right? He's definitely a foreigner, probably a Portuguese foreigner, maybe Spanish, but probably Portuguese at this point, right? We have that, right? What else do we see? How about these guys over here? Are these clothes that seem to sort of fit the Japanese fashion sense at the time? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are probably Japanese.
These are Japanese. All right. Other thoughts? The Japanese are a little bit hard to see. We have to look hard to find them. So these people here, these are samurai, or perhaps samurai merchants, probably samurai here. These are not samurai, though. Henry?
Are they trainers from China?
No.
No?
All right. We're getting lots of good ideas here, but they're not from China. Yeah? The daimyo? No. So I'll give you a hint, though. They're not Japanese. These individuals are not Japanese.
Are those like priests?
Priests from
Somewhere in Europe.
Western Europe, right? So these are people of the missionary groups that come to Japan. And tell me your name again? Aaron? Eric. Okay, and what's your name? Jonah. Thank you guys for pitching in on this. So we have to sort of decipher this, and it's also a bit blurry, but we have these European priests, right, who I want to get to next, who are part of the story as well. We also have some Portuguese slaves. And I wanted to see if you guys caught that. It's kind of hard to see here, but they're also part of this as well. The Japanese had never seen a person before of African descent, so they were quite surprised and impressed by that as well. The first missionaries who come to Japan arrive in 1549. So it's 6 years after the arrival of the Portuguese, but they come in the wake of this trade discovery in an effort to try and spread Christianity. So let's take a step back and talk about who these people are, these Christians, these missionaries. as you may have read about or heard about in other classes, the Jesuits were established in 1541 by St. Ignatius Loyola. All the schools that have this name, Loyola, right, they're talking about him. He has a desire to help strengthen Christianity and make the Catholic form of Christianity again popular. As you may know, there was this thing called the Reformation that happened that really undermined the authority of the Catholic Church in Western Europe. And that's a story I won't go into today, but he envisioned the Catholic Church being a much more like active and aggressive actor in the world of missionization and sharing Christianity. And the Pope actually then gives him the right to found a new order. This order called the Jesuits is one of the prime motors of the Counter-Reformation, trying to revitalize Catholicism by trying to globalize Christianity, but the Catholic kind in particular. So when we talk about exploration, right, of the globe happening with lots of merchants and conquistadors and also navigators, they're oftentimes working very closely with some effort to globalize Catholicism in the world. You probably have heard that before, nothing new to you there. So they also go to Japan. The first missionary to go to Japan is St. Francis Xavier, another person whose name you probably have seen a lot in various schools and churches and these kinds of things. And he lands in Kagoshima, which is at the very tip of Kyushu, right, Japan's southernmost major island. And this is another important turning point because in contrast to the Portuguese merchants who are actually there just to trade and who don't have any interest really in speaking Japanese and who are kept very much at a distance, the Jesuits who arrive, they want to learn Japanese. They want to actually have a cultural contact because that's how that's how this could be a mission that would succeed, by being able to communicate in Japanese. And I won't go into that in too much detail, but this is the first cultural exchange, really, beyond just looking and pointing and exchanging funds to actually having a cultural conversation. If we fast forward a little bit, the mission of Christianity does succeed for about a century in Japan. There are over 300,000 Japanese who convert. At the time, 15, 20,000. It's not a huge number, but it's still a large number of people who convert to Christianity, including people also of the daimyo class. So it has some convincing elements to it. But very importantly, the Jesuits are also, because of this cultural context, well situated to then help translate for the merchants. So the merchants are able to make these transactions and trade interactions happen more smoothly thanks to these Jesuits. So they kind of work very closely together, in fact, right? The missionary and the merchant, and that is part of what defines their importance for the daimyo as well as for the merchants. They all want this to work out. In terms of what is happening, they're also trying to demonstrate how advanced European knowledge is. And sometimes admitting that Japan has things to offer as well, but they're actively teaching, like mathematics and physics and astronomy, because the Jesuits at this point are actually the most educated sort of people, among those well-educated people in Western Europe, having gone to the best schools in Paris and in Rome, so that they know a lot about this kind of learning, which impresses a lot of Japanese daimyo and others as well. They also meet with Buddhist priests who, some of whom are willing to talk and not just shun them for being like a rival group's advocates. And they also meet with Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. So they really go up quickly the social and the political ladder, talk with the country's leaders. But it's not all going to work out for the best. I mentioned about a century because it's not a very long time. It will come to an end, mostly because of things that they did or chose to do that did not correspond with Japanese cultural or legal norms. One of the issues was that the daimyo often would make Christianity the religion of their domain, or their han, or their fief, right, their han, and then everyone would have to then become a Christian. This makes sense in Japanese context, but for those who criticize it, they think this sort of forceful conversion process is very problematic. That's one issue. Another issue is that there were many samurai, and especially there were many daimyo, who were extremely proud of being Christians. They had their own emblems, their own Christian emblems made up. They had new Christian names made up, and this became a bit of a conflict, right, with the iconography and the belief system or those of Japan, I should say. And of course, as you may also know, as a very much monotheistic religion, Christianity is the idea of putting your God and their commands over those of your superior, right? Doesn't work very well either with the sort of loyalty structure that should have been in place at the time. But the biggest issues, I think, more than the other things I've just mentioned, are that the Portuguese who were there, most of the Jesuits are Portuguese, come into conflict with newly arriving Spanish missionaries. These are Franciscans, as well as Dominicans also who arrive as well. The Spanish, though, who arrive would like themselves to be able to have a strong foothold for their mission efforts in Japan. And this rivalry leads to the Spanish talking about colonization and how oftentimes Portuguese missionaries precede colonization, right, in other countries. Does that make sense? Right? And so as you can imagine, this is a bit worrying for the Japanese who hear this, especially for Toyotomi Hideyoshi. They also sometimes make bad choices. The Jesuits, for example, offer to help Hideyoshi to procure a Portuguese battleship to help him to attack Korea. That was not a very wise thing to offer, right? So all these things make the Christian effort and mission seem very worrisome for Hideyoshi and others as well, and so it will become illegal. So I will go through that in a little bit more, but it's also tied to other things as well. So first, Hideyoshi, he forbids Christianity in 1587. Relatively early in his leadership of Japan as the regent, he outlaws Christianity and tells all Christians that they have to leave. All the European missionaries have to leave. Everyone has to renounce Christianity, but it's not very strongly enforced. So it sort of goes underground for a bit. But it does gain some toleration, and as long as there still is a desire for this trade, the Jesuit and missionary role, I should say, in trade. So there's a lot of tolerance for this relationship, but things do continue to become problematic, and in the sort of the pinnacle of pre-Tokugawa anti-Christian sentiment is in 1596 when Hideyoshi orders the execution of 26 Christians, who we see here in Nagasaki. And this is a story that I won't go into today, but this was his way of saying that Christianity in Japan has no place, and it's politically a rebellious ideology. So as we get into the next period, the period of the Tokugawa shogunate, as we talked about last class, the legacy of Hideyoshi on Christianity is still very much, it's only a few years later, right? Very visible, very much present. And so it is only officially prohibited again by the second shogun, Tokugawa Hidetada, in 1612. And this time there is a centralized state that is ready to actually carry out and enforce this prohibition. And they exile foreign priests in 1614. And they actually tell priests they have to go. So as opposed to before, there was sort of a bit of a, we'll wait and see, or we want to maintain a certain trade relationship. Here we have a very aggressive approach to Christianity in Japan. Christian daimyo, who are, especially those who are in the retinue of the, or actually in the daimyo who are earliest loyal to Tokugawa Ieyasu, they are often purged and punished for not renouncing Christianity, and then it becomes more aggressive with the establishment of the Fumie system. And this is a system where Christians had to renounce Christianity, and then they would have to demonstrate their lack of belief by stomping on an image of Jesus or Mary, and not showing any sort of signs of sadness, right? So it was a very aggressive policy meant to really stamp out, no pun intended, Christianity in Japan. Not so much because of some sort of, like Eastern versus Western cultural thing, but because in fact, Christianity did have the potential to inspire ideology that would contradict what the shogunate was trying to make happen. And we actually see this really happening in 1639 with the Shimabara Rebellion. The daimyo of Shimabara domain, which is another domain in Kyushu, raises taxes and also outlaws Christianity. Basically, passing on the same rules that have been made at the level of the state down to the level of his domain, but also in what seems to have been in a very unfair way, raising taxes to build a bigger, nicer castle. And some of the daimyo, some of the samurai, but also a lot of peasants, they rebel. And they rebel against both of these issues, right? The Christianity part, because they are Christians. This was a Christian domain with a very well-known sort of set of Christian samurai leaders, but also because the taxes were unfair in their view. Their leader, this was his standard, right? That he put up as he went forth in the street. He really cared about this quite a bit. But they rebel, and this is the only major rebellion of the entire Edo or Tokugawa period. So it really is a big deal that they chose to make this stand against their daimyo. The shogunate intervenes, and with help from the Dutch, who, as we'll see in a little bit, are sort of trying to make their way into this trade between Japan and China to replace the Portuguese who've been kicked out. They suppress this uprising. And after a 3-month siege, the rebels are executed, and the daimyo, also importantly, who had not done a good job of handling his own affairs, right? Who had caused such unrest in his own domain, was also beheaded. Anyway, this episode, right? It shows that Christianity really had the potential to be controversial, to be a religion of dissent, and this is what the shogunate was trying to fight against. So we talked about Japan before being this country that was poorly connected. The entire goal of the shogunate under the first 3 Tokugawa shogunates is to create a unified country, and Christianity seems to have the ability to impede that, and here it shows that it does indeed have that potential, very much so. So this is a lot about Christianity. This is actually a religion that was not born in Japan. It's not a Japanese religion at this point in time. But I talk about it because I think it's really important to understanding how Japan is going to change afterwards. The country of Japan is actually going to be largely sort of built upon policies made to deal with this situation. So let's go to those next. The first one is the temple registration system, or the Shumon Aratame. This system required that every person in Japan had to enter into a compulsory religion affiliation register. And at birth, marriage, or when someone died, someone had to go and report this to their local temple, their local Buddhist temple, and they had to also affirm or reaffirm their disbelief in Christianity. So you go to the temple, you would say, I've had a child, his or her name is so and is this, and then you would also swear or stamp on an image of the Virgin or of Jesus, and then you would get your stamp saying that you had registered. It's a pretty big deal, a big shift from before there was no national system of religion to this thing. So for up until pretty recently, we thought about this as an anti-Christian measure. Like the Christian thing was bad, they wanted to create more unity, and this was a way to do that. But it also has, I think, as you can imagine, a lot of other important implications. So let me ask you this to you as a class. Why would the shogunate go through all this trouble to have people go to a temple and register? Like, how does that serve the shogunate, this system? Nick?
Yeah. It's also kind of a way to keep track of your population. Like, it's like a census.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely a census, right? So from a country that had been able relatively recently to have its first land surveys of knowing who owned what land, we have now this creation of a census, but based on this anti-Christian policy system. Yeah, Henry?
I would imagine it helped them to levy efficient taxes, knowing how many people there are.
Yeah.
Make sure you get as much as you could out of the population.
Numbers are great, but having numbers for the purpose of making more tax income, right, is definitely a good thing. So that's a really important element here. I think I may even be on the next slide. It is. And also, bless you, what does the government gain, or what do they how do they benefit from having people go to a local temple so often for births, deaths, marriages, and whenever they're called upon to prove that they aren't Christian? How does this? How could the government also draw benefit from that besides tax income?
It encourages them to be part of like an approved religion.
Okay, right. So now we're bringing them into this other approved, much more Japanese religion, right? Which the government by now has a pretty strong hand upon this system of belief as well. Other things that can come out of this that are positive for the government. Nolan? Okay. Yeah, right. So everyone is going to go to the same kinds of temples. They're all Buddhist temples. Bless you. And they're all going to be now part of this unified national identity, right? We'll see this happening more and more over time, but this is a big part of what's happening here. I also should mention that this is now going to become a central place. Buddhist temples were not by any means state institutions. Most of them had no funding from the state. They were private and semi-public, but they were not state-funded institutions. So what we have here is that the shogunate is going to begin to pump money into Buddhist temples to allow them to actually handle all of these people coming to do all this recording, to fund and pay for the food of all of these monks and priests who are going to have to do the work of writing all this stuff down and to store it. So as you can see, this is going to change things quite a bit for Japan. And also, temples have to be kept in good shape so that they can post all of the placards or the signs that say Christianity is illegal, but also things like the shogunate's most recent edicts about not consuming too much sugar, or not spending too much money, or about better behavior. So it's as you said, I think very well, Nolan, this is about ideology in many ways, and about national identity as a Japanese person they're trying to build here. So all these things work together to make this system of the shogunate one that's ideologically much more cohesive than whatever was in place before, and sort of using Christianity as the straw man against which this is being built. Another important idea that I want to get to is the idea of Japan as a closed country. Before we get there, I want to talk about the Dutch. I mentioned a second ago the Dutch, they've made their way kind of on the heels of the Portuguese Empire. As you may know, the Dutch East India Company has become the next big sort of global mercantilist venture, and they're going all over Southeast Asia. They're in Latin America, and they make their way to Japan. And they see that the Portuguese are being kicked out. And they have an idea. We could do the same thing with our gunships, right? But we could offer not to preach, to not preach Christianity. We could offer to be, as we are, Protestants, and not to be trying to spread Christianity. And that is how they negotiate with the shogunate the right to do this trade and to replace the Portuguese. But in order to do that, the Japanese have to also have a system in place to avoid them contaminating Japanese ideas, Japanese minds and hearts. So they actually create an island called Dejima, which kind of just means like outer island. It's a man-made island. It's about 2 acres. It's only about 2 acres. Sorry, this is actually not supposed to be on the background, but I think I can kind of go through these one by one. So it is built in 36. Only 2 ships are allowed to go per year to take part in this trade between Japan and China from Dejima. And it's not very big, as I said before. Now what says here is it's tied to the mainland here by a bridge. And this bridge is actually, it's on both sides, it is guarded to control the flow of Japanese to Dejima, and from Dejima, the Dutch to Japan. So it's kind of like a little sort of appendage to Japan that's very much closed off. And the gate here also, there's a big gate here that's also closely guarded on the inside. So they're really worried about this, this foreign presence in Japan as well. There are also protocols for how you can come and go from Dejima, which is in the harbor of Nagasaki. So a ship would have to come, would have to fire a cannon, but at a safe distance to show that it was going to be friendly and it meant no harm. Then there will be a Japanese return fire or a volley, and that's how this was supposed to happen. So it was all very much regulated and regimented to sort of prevent anyone from trying to just come in and take what was being kept there, and also to promote the sort of sequestering of Japan from the West. And there also were inspections and a lot of confiscations. Thank you, Nolan. So this is about when they find things like a Bible on a boat or in the affairs of one of the Dutch merchants, they were confiscated. So it was a very much, again, a very hands-on approach to that. I'll mention these last 2 things here. So on Dejima, there were what are called factories, which are more or less warehouses where all the goods were kept or being traded between Japan and China. And there also was a Dutch, they call him a physician, who was in charge of the health of the Dutch who were taking part in this trade. And unlike the merchants, he would actually stay on Dejima. And he would have sometimes a garden, he'd write books, learn Japanese, do experiments, these kinds of things. And this is an important person, I'll get to this in a little bit, but he's an important person because of what he's able to learn about Japan, and also eventually to teach Japan about the West, this Dutch physician. So here you can see Dejima also from a different point of view. You can see this bridge here and the island of Dejima here, and this is Nagasaki and Japan proper over here. So again, a lot of concern about foreign influence and using Christianity as the sort of the frightening, vilified foreign threat. They built a system here of sequestering and keeping really at bay the West. So this is part of why we have so often called Japan the sakoku, or closed country. Europeans could not go to Japan, and they'll try to go to Japan lots and lots of times over the next 2 centuries. But if they aren't going through Dejima, they're not getting into Japan. They're being fired upon. They're having their ships sunk. This is where you go, and the Dutch are the only ones who have access to this for about 2 centuries. But Japan was not really a closed country. And I want to use our time to now talk about that a bit more in detail. So in actuality, the Japanese were trying to reposition themselves in the world order. They wanted to control all trade going into Japan, but especially trade going from the west. So that trade had to go through Dejima. But their trade with the rest of Asia was very much vibrant and was very active. And I'll talk about the different places here that sort of help us to understand that. So if we talk about the first, so these are some important trade zones or trade ports. The first is Tsushima, and Tsushima is here. And this is going to be an island that is part of Japan, but that is connecting trade from southern Korea over to northwest Kyushu. Now, this is the trade carried out by one daimyo family called the So family in Tsushima. And so all kinds of things that are coming from Korea are going through this channel. The Ouchi and Hosokawa in Kobe, which I think we can probably see here, yeah, are the ones who are kind of handling all the trade from China, from Fujian and other places in China as well. Yeah, I don't have a picture of that one, I think, but I would like to also, sorry, the Kagoshima, which is down here at the bottom of Kyushu, this is the trade that's being carried out with the Ryukyu Kingdom, which is today's Okinawa. It was its own independent kingdom for its entire history, and now it's going to be part of this sort of Japan sphere of influence as they trade with the Shimazu daimyo family of Kagoshima. And the last is the Matsumae family, and they are trading up with the people of Ezo, which are up here. And this is a lot of furs and seal skins, and also wood, eventually fish. And they are mostly here, the Matsumae, so they're overseeing that trade. So even though Japan seems like it's close to the West, it's actually not closed to these other important Chinese, Korean, Ryukyuan, or sort of Karelian, or the Kuril Islands trades that are going, or Russia. These kinds of trades are still happening very much. We know about this because there are some records. We also have heard about it a lot from the embassies that traveled to Japan to bring tribute. And embassies came from what today is Okinawa to bring tribute on a birthday or a coronation day or an important funeral event for someone in the shogunal household. They would come and bring gifts, and they would more or less buy the right to be part of Japan's larger economic sphere. This image here shows embassy coming from Ryukyu, with today's Okinawa, with their distinctive clothing as they visit Edo. So it was a big deal, and it was drawn in as such. And even if we're thinking about Japan not being fully closed, we can also talk about the Dutch, who are supposed to be stuck on a little island that's only 2 acres large, that is closed off by a well-guarded bridge from Japan, and how this should have made them very much not at all part of Japan's culture. But this is not what happened. The Dutch became, especially the Dutch factory physician, because he was there so much, because interest in the West did begin to mount, especially in the area around Dejima, in Nagasaki. They began to seek out this physician to ask him for information, and increasingly there was a loosening of these rules. So the only knowledge about the West that came into Japan, or most of it, came through this portal of Dejima, and through the Dutch factory physician. Things like what was happening in the world, in politics, in economics, but also in the sciences would come through him as well. Same for medicine. This is one of the drawings that the Japanese students actually drew of an invention that they learned about through a Dutch factory physician. Can anybody tell me what this is? Raise your hand. Love to see some hands I haven't seen yet. Those of you in the sciences, yeah. It's not a lamp, but I can see how that would kind of, yeah. But it does use light, this kind of light from the sun here to yeah. Microscope, yeah. And is it, what's your name? Evelyn, yes. This is a microscope. It actually even says microscope. So this is one of the things that the Dutch, who are at sort of the forefront in science, along with the Germans at this point in time, are able to bring to Japan and introduce. This is a Japanese text from a little bit later, describing a procedure that they've been able to observe in person on the island of Dejima. And it was one that would not happen in Japan proper for lots of reasons. I'll get into that in a second. But anyway, can anybody guess what's happening in this image?
Surgery.
Is it right here?
Rochelle.
Huh? Rochelle. It's surgery, okay. Surgery. It's a certain kind of surgery, yeah?
Autopsy.
An autopsy, right? So this is a surgery upon a dead human body. In a country that has very strong rules about purity and impurity, both in Buddhist, but especially Shinto religion, and also in practice, this would not be possible in Japan. There was no autopsy. There was no sort of cadaver-based science at all in Japan. So Japanese who had medical knowledge and sort of these desires were trying to learn more about human bodies from wherever they could get, from Chinese books, from Korean books, but also when they could get a hold of them from European books. So this is one of the things that they were able to see being performed by a Dutch. Actually, this was being performed somewhere else. This is a book that they were able to translate, but they got the book from a Dutch factory physician. So over time, this small line of information into Japan has major impacts. They create the first observatory. They also convinced the government of Japan, the shogunate, to allow people to translate books from Dutch into Japanese. They legalized books also from the West. Not the Bible, but other books were legalized. So what we have here is this closed country, in fact, has a super dynamic relationship with its neighbors in East Asia. And it also has this pipeline of information coming from the West through Dejima at their own level of control. And this makes for a country that's not quite as closed as it might seem.